Welcome in, everybody. DawgNation Daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. Hashtag go for 2 in 22. We're all about that. And on Saturday in Athens, hope to see a lot of two fingers in the air for the mission that Georgia's on. No guarantee how it ends, but no denying where it's all heading towards a big push, towards another chase for a national championship here at the end of the season. We'll hear Kirby Smart on that topic, at least to a degree, before the show is done today. Good stuff. Mike Griffith going to join us from Knoxville. He's on hand there for a little bit of coverage of two future Georgia opponents and really one of the big games in the SEC this week. The old rivalry that was kind of a classic in the 90s, relevant again here, at least on the Tennessee side on Saturday, Vols and Gators. We'll talk a little bit about that, but mostly about Georgia here coming up in a couple of minutes. We'll have some early previews of the big games of the weekend. I say big games in air quotes. It's probably not the deepest weekend we've seen when it comes to college football, but it's still some fun stuff, and we'll obviously get into that here coming up in just a little bit. Kirby Smart yesterday also used two really good phrases. I'm talking about like kind of almost like well-written literature type stuff, at least in one respect. One of these definitely had kind of a literary quality to it. And another phrase that just sort of sounds good kind of on a billboard or a bumper sticker or something like that. I'll give you some of that from Kirby here before we're done. Also, off the top of the program, we've heard a lot of like sort of puffery around Georgia. Praise of, best team ever, machine of death or whatever it is they've been kind of described as being. And some of that sort of feels sort of vapid and meaningless. But what if I could give you kind of a quantifiable, measurable example of the fact that the perception of Georgia has changed pretty quickly in a very meaningful way? I'm going to do that off the top of the program here in just a moment. Let me also get a couple more quick comments before we get rolling here. Scott Harris shouting out Dan Jackson. Good interview with him. Check that on the DawgNation YouTube page. Dan had a nice day against South Carolina. You love seeing him get the credit that he deserves. That's fun. Elijah Pitts, thanks for the kind words, says, I love the show and love how you handle the show. It's really not easy doing what you do, but you do it effortlessly. Well, I appreciate that, Elijah. I don't know that we do it effortlessly around here. We have a lot of folks that help us put the show on and make sure it gets on the air each and every day. But the fact that you would show up and be a part of the conversation and say those kind of things, man, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Senior Dog says, talking about the 2023 schedule, says that Lane Kiffin portrays the surfer dude image, but in reality his teams are hard-nosed and well-coached. They're playing pretty good defense right now. They really are. Both the Mississippi schools are actually playing decent defense. And right now I would say, even though they just completely blasted Tech, right now I would say the Ole Miss defense is a little bit ahead for the offense here right now. Hunker Down 93 says, I'm playing Mr. Mom this morning, and this is keeping my sanity. And he says, applause to all the folks helping us be on the air. No doubt. Michael Carvel here, a whole team of folks that you never really see that help make sure these broadcasts get off and get going. So certainly appreciative of that. And Hunker Down 93, take care of those kids, and we'll try to keep you company while you do all of that. All right, so really good stuff. Glad to have you with us. It is thoughts on the weekend's worth of games before we're done. Pretty fun golden shoe to wrap things up here today. Mike Griffith talking dogs. He'll be in Knoxville looking ahead to a couple Georgia rivals squaring off on Saturday. Good stuff from Kirby Smart, including two phrases in particular that really stood out to me. But before that, perception about Georgia is changing. And it's changing for the better. It's changing quickly, and we can measure it and tell you just exactly how much and what it might mean for Saturday's game and the games that come after that there as well. Let's talk some Georgia offense off the top of the program today. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So we opened the show yesterday by playing some audio from Peter Burns, SEC Network. Peter's a guy that we like. We brought him on the show last year to explain why he thought Georgia was going to win the national championship. It turns out his prediction is correct. And as you heard yesterday, he's going to take that prediction to a next level, that not only do they win the national championship, but they're not going to play a close game all year. And there are a lot of people, including the Kent State coach, the opponent for Saturday, who are kind of saying something similar and all that. And I think there's a degree to which Georgia fans kind of like the fact they're finally getting some attention, finally getting some praise, finally getting some pats on the back. I think there's a sort of a collection of Georgia fans who are like, it's about time people recognized who the best team in the country really is. There is an element of this that I think for a lot of Georgia fans is kind of enjoyable. And I think there's also the acknowledgement of all of this is also just sort of puffery. All of this is just sort of high praise, but doesn't really necessarily mean anything. You can't, measure it. You can't put it, in a bottle, and it's all just kind of sort of non-existent, right? It doesn't really necessarily mean anything. Well, what if I told you today that there is actually a much more quantifiable example of how perception of Georgia has changed, and it's an example of change for the better, and we can point at it and recognize it and talk about specifically what it means. If I told you that, would you be interested in that? I think you probably will be. We're going to have to go into the weeds here a little bit to kind of unearth this, but hopefully it'll be a journey worth taking for a moment. Are you familiar with gambling? Now, a lot of you can do a point spread bet of like so-and-so is going to win the game by X number of points. You can do what's called a money line bet where you have to sort of pay an extra price just to sort of pick the winner. And if you get it right, you'll sort of pay for certain odds, but you have a chance to bet that way. And you have what's called an over-under total, an expected point total for a game. Now, Georgia, as you might imagine, when it comes to expected point totals, has been going under a lot, meaning you add the score for Georgia and you add the score for the opponent together. That total, Georgia games have a very, very substantial history, both recently and relatively long-term, of hitting the under. Now, some of you know this a lot. Some of you don't know this at all, but this is all going somewhere here today. So if you think about the expected total for a Georgia game, there have been 5 straight games dating back to obviously last season, 5 straight UGA games that have hit under the expected total. Georgia's so good defensively where that just sort of seems to happen. For instance, the week 1 game against Oregon, the team total for Oregon was somewhere around 17, 18 points, and yet they barely scored at all. And if it had not been for a bad call against who was Kamari Laster, then you would have gotten probably any points whatsoever. That's an example of even when the expectation by the bettors and the lines makers, the odds makers, is that the Georgia defense will play well. They've even played better than that for the most part, and that's why you've had 5 straight Georgia games go under the expected total. But not only that, once again, dating back to, like, say, October of last year, 11 of the last 14 games that Georgia has played have gone under. This is as close to a rubber stamp as you get, especially against Power 5 competition when Georgia wins. Georgia games have just had a long history, substantial history of going underneath the expected total. So you might imagine that with a game coming up on Saturday, knowing that's what the track record has been, that there would once again be this expectation. Well, I know the Georgia game is going under because the Georgia game always goes under. Except when you listen to gambling experts, they are saying something very different than that right now. I want to show you a tweet on the screen here if you're watching on video, and if you're not, I'll read it to you. There's a guy named Brad Powers who's kind of a very entrenched college football gambling guy. I think he's a pretty good follow on Twitter. I don't know him personally, but I think he's a pretty good follow on Twitter. And this is one of the things that he shared this week. These are the college football lines, whether it be point spreads, totals, whatever else, that have moved the most thus far this week from where they opened. He cites Circus Sports, which is one of the sports books out in Nevada, but you see a similar thing if you look at our preferred sports book with MyBookie. You see a similar thing happening here right now. That among the biggest line movers so far this week on the list here is the Kent State Georgia over. It has gone from where it opened the week to 50 at 55.5 all the way up to 62. Now you say, well, BA, what does that mean? It means suddenly a gambling market that puts its money where its mouth is. They're not just spewing off hot takes and sharing whatever else. A gambling market that knows that if they have the wrong line, they stand to lose money, has completely reconsidered Georgia. And they've done so very, very quickly. Even though the recent data, including Saturday's game, by the way, even though the recent data says, hey, Georgia games, they go under. This year, last year, Kirby Smart era, this defensive brand of football and relatively conservative brand of offense, that's a pretty good recipe for a game that goes under its expected total. Well, suddenly, because of how Georgia's scoring offensively, that you don't quite consider that to be such a rubber stamp anymore. In fact, a lot of movement on this point total, sending it from 55.5 all the way up to 62. And if you look at Georgia, somewhere around a 45 or so point favorite, you're talking about an expected final score here and somewhere in the neighborhood of 55-7 there on Saturday. In other words, the expectation for points, if you look at the total and the spread, is not for Kent State to score very much. They're only expected to score 7 or 8 points in the game. But if you look at Georgia, the expectation is this offense that's averaging 43.3 points per game thus far this year is going to find its way into the 50s on Saturday. So this is an example of something quantifiable and measurable. This isn't just, blowhard with a microphone saying Georgia's the greatest team of all time. This is, data-driven gambling experts saying, we have to retabulate what we think of Georgia offensively because suddenly this is a team that's just as capable of scoring as it is of stopping its opposition from scoring, and that is now reflected in the gambling market as the expected total for Georgia goes up from 55.5 up to 62 there on Saturday. And obviously, as you might imagine, the subject of the Georgia offense has been a little bit of a hot topic here over the course of the last few days there in Athens, too. In fact, yesterday I thought it was somewhat ironic that Kirby was asked the exact opposite question than he might have been asked a year ago. Last year with Georgia doing so well defensively, I think there was this thought of, wow, does this great defense make things easier for the offense? Average starting field position, shorter fields to drive on. Georgia was scoring a good number of points last year, but being set up well by the defense seemed to be a reason for that. Well, all of a sudden now you fast forward to 2022, Georgia's defense is playing very well, but you almost wonder if the way the offense is performing is now setting up the defense for some of its success. And Kirby Smart talked a little bit about that yesterday, what he's seeing from his offense right now. Here's Kirby from after practice last night.
I think that the lead, the scoring on offense has made other offenses play us differently. And, we haven't been in one of those kind of games yet where it's, when you get into a 2-score, 3-score lead, sometimes it puts a lot of pressure on the other side of the ball on the offense and allows you to play looser at times on defense too.
Isn't it a fun thing to consider? Kirby Smart and this offense that's suddenly getting noticed and maybe getting the respect that it deserves, saying, hey, I maybe can look at my defense now and see a group that can play a little looser, a little more relaxed, kind of come after quarterbacks maybe a little bit more because Georgia, the way it's scoring points, is putting so much pressure on opposing offense to try to match that. All of a sudden, maybe they're taking more risks than they would otherwise take, or they're just a little more tense than they otherwise would be because they now know that against a very formidable defense, they have to try to match a Georgia offense that's seemingly scoring on just about every drive that it's in the game, at least when the game matters most, first 3 quarters. This is a Georgia offense that's been pretty close to perfect, and Kirby says that's putting a lot of pressure on opposing offenses to try to match that, and all of a sudden maybe that does help the defense just a bit. And he also in that same quote talked about the work that the defense gets to do against that Georgia offense in practice every single day, that kind of helping there as well. But what Smart is describing, the way in which the offense is helping drive the story for Georgia, is the kind of thing that is now being noticed by a lot of people. And coming off the game against South Carolina on Saturday, when Georgia obviously marched down for 48 points, a lot of that respect earned during that game. Stetson Bennett, who was a big part of that story, despite the fact that he battled illness a little bit on Saturday, he talked about what he thought the game against South Carolina demonstrated about Georgia's offense. What does it prove about the Dogs? This is what Stetson said about that on Saturday.
I don't know what it says or anything like that, but, I think we handled business this week coming into it. I think we respected South Carolina and Coach Beamer and prepared well for them, and then came out here and executed.
I would say, to add to Stetson Bennett's words, he says, hey, this shows that we handled business. I think what you're saying in terms of how, pundits who are in the media or gambling folks, whatever else, I think what they're saying to you right now is, this isn't just a Georgia offense that handled its business against the Gamecocks or has handled its business through 3 games thus far this year. This is now a Georgia offense that is viewed to handle its business going forward there as well. And the expectation kind of baked into the cake when it comes to Georgia is the offense is now every bit as good as the defense is. And when you formulate your opinion of Georgia, you think about that side of the ball just as much as you think about the defensive side of the ball, which has obviously been a big part of the story for Georgia for quite some time. And someone who kind of seemingly understands just how formidable the offensive challenge is that Georgia provides right now is the guy who was probably the biggest part of that story on Saturday. Tight end Brock Bowers, I would say one of the small handful of most dynamic pass catchers in the entire country. he certainly seems to understand just how good the offense he's playing truly is, and I think he probably deep down knows he's a big part of that. This was his evaluation of his offense after the game on Saturday.
I think it is difficult just to stop our offense. We got so many playmakers, like I said, like Marcus, Ladd, just all the receivers, our running backs. Kenny can get on the perimeter, Kendall run downhill, and then our tight end room is good. So, I think it's just hard to stop just because we got so many playmakers.
Hard to stop it because we have so many playmakers. That's not just puffery. That's not just a teammate bragging on his fellow teammates. That is measurable and quantifiable. You look at the gambling experts, the people who, if they are wrong, they lose money because of their incorrect opinion. They have now retabulated their assessment of Georgia. They have known that Georgia's great on defense for a long time, but based on the way in which the line is going to move for this Kent State game on Saturday, the point total has risen. All of a sudden, the expectation is that Georgia has an offense just as capable of scoring points as the defense for quite some time has been capable of stopping teams from scoring points. That's why people have been so enamored with Georgia through 3 games. This is truly a team right now dominating in all phases. We've been used to seeing it on special teams. We've been used to seeing it on defense. And now we're all enjoying it, seeing on offense there as well. And that's a level of dominance that smart folks sort of expect to continue. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. We're glad to have you with us here today, and glad to send the message of hashtag go for 2 in 22. Let's see those 2 fingers in the air. That's the pursuit that Georgia's on. That's the mission that they are chasing down here. And not just to win a game on Saturday against Kent State, but to win them all, to win every game. Just the same way they were on that same chase last year for the first time in 40 years. Now they're ready to come back and do it again another year later for the second time in the last 2 years. So we're excited about all of that and happy to have you with us on the journey as UGA tries to chase that down. Whether you join us 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, all kinds of video platforms. Facebook, we talked about that. Obviously, radio at noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, Apple, Spotify, worldfamousDawgNation.com, the Google Player on the Android device. A million different ways to be a part of the show. We are just so happy to have you with us. And a big thanks to our friends at Breda Pest Management for making it all possible. You know, some folks thought that South Carolina might be a nuisance or a pest to UGA on Saturday, but that was not the case. Georgia was well protected at Williams-Brice Stadium. Of course, Sanford Stadium, the home of the Dogs, well protected as well from bugs and critters and termites and everything else because of Breda Pest Management, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. And that same level of service that Breda provides to the Dogs, they can provide to you there as well. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics wants to give you that same level of service. And here's the good news. For an organization like Breda Pest Management, which has been in business since the 1970s, more than 100 employees working all across the Atlanta area and throughout the state of Georgia, that level of institutional expertise, that level of strength, the resources that they have marshaled towards the cause of protecting you from bugs and critters can also be used to help save you money there as well. Because, let's face it, if you're working with some fly-by-night company that doesn't have quite the same level of resource that Breda Pest Management has, they're raising prices month after month, year after year to keep up with the costs. And a smaller, less capable company is going to keep passing those expense raises on to you, and your price for service is going to keep going up and up and up. That's why when Breda Pest Management, when you make the switch to Breda, they're going to save you money instantly just for doing that because they can lean on all of the resources they have available to them. So I want you to check them out online, BredaPest.com, B-R-E-D-A, BredaPest.com. Make the switch to Breda Pest, put more money in your pocket right away, and you can also say you're doing business with the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That is really good stuff, and that is something you're going to want to do today. Now, speaking of really good stuff, also here coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to have Mike Griffith on the show. And Mike's going to be live in Knoxville. He's doing some coverage for us this week of the Tennessee-Florida game, 2 future Georgia opponents, and pretty big game in the SEC here this week. So we'll talk to him about that coming up in just a little bit. Before that, though, I do want to go around the doghouse. And Kirby Smart said something yesterday that I thought was really cool. And this is a lot of the same stuff. Like, we're going to do a lot, unfortunately, of the same thing with Kirby a lot, which is, oh, you idiots in the media say this, but this is what we say behind the scenes. And you're just going to come to expect that. But in the midst of a pretty typical Kirby quote yesterday, I thought he gave us 2 really good lines. And it's probably worth spending, a couple of seconds here on both of those. The question comes up with, okay, how are you going to keep young players focused when you're winning games as easily as you are right now? Whether it be complacency that creeps in or just sort of the natural boredom of being asked to do the same thing day after day after day, which is a lot of what success really is in life. How do you keep all these guys focused knowing that the opponent from a week-to-week basis might not be all that capable of challenging? And Kirby gave you a little bit of a long answer. It's about a minute's worth here, but two really good lines in the midst of this minute's worth of audio. So let's say you're Kirby Smart from last night on how it is that he convinces young players to work as hard as he needs for them to work. Here's Kirby.
Well, the tape does that. I mean, there's success to you guys in statistics. There's not necessarily success for us. And you watch a tape and you cut a guy free. You watch a tape and a guy didn't do his job. He didn't strike the right guy. We gave up a gap. I mean, again, guys, there's no perfect defense or perfect offense that we've played. We know that the winner will ask what we did in the fall. And what we're doing now is preparation for what is to come, and that includes getting better every day, regardless of who our opponent is. You know, we're not out there just getting ready for Kent State. We're getting ready for the entire schedule we got. We want to get our players better. You know, we're trying to get guys better for the first game next year because we got some guys that may not play this year. So we're in the development business, and we do that really hard. We're not caught up in statistics or where we are right now because it really doesn't matter. You know, they may get it outside from you guys and read it, but they're not hearing about it over here.
So one of the things I like to do is I'm not in Athens on a regular basis. I live in the Atlanta area. I'm almost always in the studio, so I don't get a chance to go to Athens for these press conferences very much. So I'm always really eager when the press conferences are posted at our DawgNation YouTube page. I'm always really eager to watch those press conferences. But in addition to that, one of the other things I also do is I always read the transcript of every press conference, and that's not easy work, like transcribing these quotes from Kirby Smart, but it's kind of interesting just to sort of read everything that he says, go along with the video, because sometimes you kind of process things written in a way that's different when you watch it on video. I will tell you this, that some of the transcripts that I saw for this Kirby Smart press conference, I think transcribed one of the lines that he used incorrectly. Some people, I think, took Smart's line there to say the winner will ask what we did in the fall, WINNER. But what Smart actually says there, and this is very like literary. This is I think a very cool line. He says the winter, WINTER, the winter will ask what we did in the fall. In other words, there is a time coming when the weather gets cold. December in Atlanta, January in either Atlanta again, Phoenix, or LA. There is a time coming in the winter where we are going to play as a program the most important games that will be played this season. And the only thing we can do right now is to prepare ourselves to be ready for that. What we're doing in the fall prepares us for the winter when it matters the most. And I love the way that he says that. The winter will ask what we did in the fall. When there is no more time to prepare, are you going to be thankful for what you did do back during September and October when you were playing around with opponents that weren't good enough to challenge you at all? But did you take the time then to get better? Because the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. And the best time to get ready for what's going to happen in December and January is right now. And Kirby says the winter will ask what we did in the fall. I just think that's a really good line. I don't know if that's something someone gave him or something he just sort of thought of on the spot, but there's something kind of literary about that, which I kind of like. I also like the fact that he said, hey, we're not just playing or practicing to beat Kent State. We're practicing to beat everybody on our schedule, which is a little bit of a callback to the great line after the South Carolina game from a year ago when Smart kind of laid down the expectation for that season. There's a certain symmetry to that, as we say, hashtag go for 2 in 22, that sort of reminds you of the kind of pursuit that Georgia got on around this same time a year ago, which I like. And then he also says that around here we view ourselves as being in the development business. Isn't that a great way to describe, what Georgia's benefiting from right now? Jamon Dumas-Johnson was developed last year. Zion Logue has been developed for a couple of years. On and on you can go and cite players who are playing more now than they played last year, but they were playing a lot in sort of blowout games last season. And that became the kind of seasoning and practice they needed to be the kinds of players they are right now. And Saturday, at a time in which a lot of us will have stopped paying attention to the game, other young players will be in that same situation, and we won't think much of it in the moment. But those of us who are Georgia fans will be very glad a year from now, 2 years from now, those players got the experience they did. And that's what the development business is all about. It's about doing what's important right now for future years, not just what's urgent for the following week. I think it's really good stuff. And it's a great line from Kirby Smart. And if you want the entire press conference, you can go to the DawgNation YouTube page and check that out for yourself. But now, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management, we will bring on our next guest. He is there live in Knoxville, Tennessee. He's doing some coverage of a really pretty interesting SEC game, but we'll talk some dogs with him there as well. It is Mike Griffith. It's our Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update with Mike here on DawgNation Daily today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I say hello to Mike Griffith here in Knoxville. He's got Neyland Stadium as background for those of you who are not watching on video right now. And, Mike, I know it was a big deal there in Knoxville before the season began that I guess Josh Heupel and the Tennessee decision-makers kind of reconfigured the outside of the stadium again. Those block Vols letters that I guess Jeremy Pruitt had taken down, they put back. So I guess Tennessee fans are feeling good that Neyland Stadium looks a little bit more like the Neyland Stadium of old. I don't know that any coach is ever going wrong by embracing the past. And I guess that's kind of what Josh Heupel did before the year began. Is that right?
Yeah, they're trying to get it going like it used to be inside the stadium as well, BA. And they still got a ways to go, but huge hurdle on Saturday, Florida, which has really, been just a thorn in Tennessee's side forever and ever and ever. So many great Tennessee teams. Peyton Manning never beat the Florida Gators. A lot of people believe that's what cost him the Heisman Trophy. But right now, it's Hendon Hooker and Tennessee trying to mount a challenge to Georgia in the East. So far, I would say the Vols look like the biggest challenger to Georgia, but they got to get through this game against Florida on Saturday at 3:30 CBS game.
I want to talk to you more about that game in a moment. Let's do a couple of things on Georgia before we get there. One of the things I talked about on Monday and wanted to kind of get your thoughts on too is the Arizona State job comes open. Todd Monken's name, at least a couple of these long lists of potential candidates. His name shows up there. I don't think the Arizona State job right now is the kind of job that I think that Monken would be interested in, nor do I think he should be interested in it. I think it's a little bit of a mess in Tempe right now. But when the offense is performing as well as it is at Georgia, this is the kind of thing I think we can expect to see a little bit more of. What do you make of the fact that Monken is probably more involved in the rumor mill for coaching jobs than he has been prior to this since being at Georgia over the course of the last couple of years, and the thought we may be hearing more of this in the months to come?
Yeah, well, when you look at what Todd Monken's done with the offense, it's really been remarkable. I mean, midseason last year, Georgia goes 180 with their offense. They go from a 4-wide spread with JT to a play-action shot team with Stetson. And then in this offseason, Monken rewires the offense once again, builds it around Stetson's skill set. Stetson looks better than ever. A lot of high-percentage passes on the perimeter. Stetson shows he can throw the intermediate pass. And so that's why Monken is popular as a candidate on the outside. The reality is he's had a shot as a head coach, and he really doesn't fit the head coach mold. When you get to know Todd Monken, he's not a warm and fuzzy guy that you put behind the podium. And I'm not sure that fits the collegiate level. Now, I think, BA, he's more likely to go back to the NFL as an offensive coordinator. That would be my guess. But right now, there's no reason for him to want to go anywhere. He's done a remarkable job with Stetson Bennett and the Georgia offense. Carson Beck actually has a higher QB rating. He appears to be next man up. Brock Vandegrift is another 5-star that he could mold. And Gunnar Stockton is impressing everybody over in the football building. So if you're Todd Monken making $2 million a year and Kirby's not going to push you too much to recruit like he does other assistant coaches, I think it's a pretty good gig.
Another piece of news has come out. We haven't really done a ton of this on the show yet. That is the fact that William Poole has stepped away from the team, and he's put his own statement out on social media. Kirby Smart's talked about that a couple of times there, too. Obviously, Poole's name will live in lore because he was a pretty big guy in the national championship game last January. But in terms of the immediate present, how do you think this impacts the secondary, and what do you think of, I guess, Georgia now minus a player out of that defensive backfield?
Well, right now, I don't think it affects it at all based on what Kirby told us with Javon Bullard and Tyke Smith playing the star position. And Poole had only played at cornerback on third downs against Oregon, Kirby said. So he was pretty minimized this year, frankly. He was pressed into action last year. Sometimes, programs have to do what they have to do with players. And, certainly Poole, a guy, a 6-year senior, you hate to see it. But Kirby Smart's got a program to run. They'll move forward, and I don't think they'll miss a beat.
This is one of those things where I think that Kirby Smart's coach speak probably actually has kind of a ring of truth to it, in that, I've talked to some people who know the South Carolina program pretty well, and like one of the things they've told me is they actually did feel like they had some opportunities to make some plays on Saturday, and some of this came in moments in which Spencer Rattler was just so overwhelmed that he couldn't deliver the football. Either he was, as the line says, kind of seeing ghosts that weren't there, or he actually really was, facing a lot of pressure. But there were some people who kind of looked at that South Carolina game plan and thought, maybe, you could have hit this guy here, hit that guy there. In other words, when Kirby says, hey, maybe the defensive performance hasn't been quite as perfect yet as you all think that it is, and maybe that there are some things that need to be cleaned up, there is a chance that maybe that's true. Now, I don't know when any of that really gets exploited, because the fact is, if you're getting good quarterback pressure, then it doesn't sort of matter sometimes what else is going on. But, there is a part of me that does kind of take that seriously of, hey, this secondary is still a little bit of a work in progress. You're still sort of figuring out what you have in certain spots, and that maybe this is one of those things where sometimes the final score and the end result doesn't quite tell the full picture of exactly what's going on.
Well, Kirby said that last year, and so did Christopher Smith, and so did Lewis Seen. I mean, there's always going to be guys open, and to your point, Brandon, as long as you're providing pressure, then that doesn't get exploited. That's why it goes together. It's so important that you have pressure up front. It can really make your secondary look good, or make your secondary look bad if you're not getting pressure. And the reason Kirby's concerned is because there are teams that have offensive lines that are capable of providing enough protection and have a good enough quarterback and good enough receivers to exploit. But there's really only 2 or 3 of those teams out there. That's the good news. Georgia can overwhelm so many players with their talent. And then you add to it the incredible coaching job that not only Todd Monken does on offense, but Will Muschamp and Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart. I mean, you talk about a trio of great defensive minds. I mean, Georgia's got the upper hand in the coaching, the preparation, the athletes, the momentum. I mean, there's really right now is such a machine, and you just got to kind of feel sorry for Kent State, the Golden Flashes, because they're going to get exposed in Athens on Saturday.
Yeah, what else about the Kent State game stands out to you? I mean, obviously you're going to be there in East Tennessee for the Vols and Gators, so you won't be in Athens, but your eyes will certainly be on Georgia-Kent State. First time for these two teams to play since 1998, the debut game of Quincy Carter. I don't know why that's on my mind, but I was thinking about that a little bit. But beyond that, what else kind of jumps out at you as the Golden Flashes do come to town on Saturday?
Well, first of all, we've all got to figure out how to stream this thing, right? Because it's not going to be on TV. I didn't think there'd be a day and age where a national champion and a number 1 ranked team wouldn't be on regular network TV or even your basic cable package. So number 1, I got to make sure that I'm set up to stream at noon, Brandon.
Yeah.
And then number 2, and I asked Kirby this on Monday at the press conference, how do you know when to pull the quarterback? And you say, well, now wait a minute, you got to win the game first, right? I know it was 7-3 Oklahoma at halftime in Norman earlier this year, whatever. Georgia's better than Oklahoma. And the reality of the situation is it's going to be hard for Kirby. Because on the one hand, Brandon, I'd like to see Stetson pile up more Heisman Trophy numbers. I'd like Stetson Bennett to stay in the Heisman Trophy race as long as he possibly can and get an invitation to New York. Because Georgia has not had a Heisman Trophy finalist since 1992, Garrison Hurst. And if it's not Stetson, then let it be Brock Bowers. But let it be somebody. And I know that team comes first. Believe me, I understand that. But I want to see a Bulldog in New York. So that's 1. But 2, I want to see more Beck. Beck looks outstanding. He's got a higher quarterback rating than Stetson. Very small sample size, right? He's got the longest run of the year, 20 yards. He looks like a different player, looks very confident. And 3, I want to see Brock Vandagriff, because if we don't start seeing Brock Vandagriff, he's going to be wearing somebody else's uniform next year. I mean, that's just how the business goes. And it seems like an impossible chore. It's not just quarterback. You got to manage all these parts of your roster, Brandon. I mean, we look around the SEC and we see Matt Landers as the leading receiver for the Razorbacks and Latavius Brini as the starting safety. We see Jalen Kimber with the pick 6 at Florida. We see Major Burns starting at LSU. There's opportunities out there. So Kirby and his staff have to do a very good job of managing this roster and keeping the best players in the fold. That's why he was talking about patience. And I get it. But this game right here, this is exactly the kind of game where you need to play those guys to let them know you're committed to their future. And that's what Kirby and his staff are doing. A lot of roster management, all the programs in the country right now. This is the situation.
Well, speaking of managing challenging situations, that's what our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau do for you there as well. I'm talking about living and working and doing life in communities just like yours across the great state of Georgia and managing your insurance needs there as well. Your home insurance, your auto insurance. That is so much of what Georgia Farm Bureau is about. Friendly agents, great folks to talk to that kind of understand what you're trying to do. You need that insurance on your vehicle because you're trying to get to work each and every day. That's how you support your family, and a good vehicle helps you with all of that. Or the home that you live in, the place that's maybe your best financial asset, but also the source of your biggest memories there as well. You want it well protected too. Georgia Farm Bureau agents understand that because they are Georgians. Georgia Farm Bureau, always the home team. And you reach out to them and find out more, gfbinsurance.com. That's gfbinsurance.com. If you want more from your insurance provider than maybe what you've got in the past, somebody that doesn't really know who you are, somebody that doesn't really care about you, well, Georgia Farm Bureau is totally different than that. They are always the home team. They want to be on your team there as well for your auto insurance needs, your home insurance needs, and a whole lot more. gfbinsurance.com. You can check them out today. So, Mike, I got to ask you this before we kind of finish up here. I know the last time you joined us via video for the show, you were there just outside Williams-Brice Stadium, and you were chased off by security. Probably not the first time in your life you've been chased off by security. But how about today? And now you have the city of Knoxville wired a lot more than probably you have Columbia. You're a much bigger deal in Knoxville than you are in Columbia. So what kind of relationship have you had with security there on hand at Neyland Stadium here today?
Well, so far, so good. This time I called ahead and asked the University of Tennessee where it would be safe for me to set up. I thought I was on pretty safe grounds. Last year, when you hear state fairgrounds, that sounds like about as much a public property as you can get. But
sure,
as it turned out, that was a private entity. And thank goodness that the security guard was a former officer from the city of Roswell, who's a big fan of DawgNation and Brandon Adams, or he probably would have shut me down. But fortunately, he recognized our program and said, I kind of wanted to hear what Brandon and you had to say, so I let you finish.
That's really funny. On a serious note, to finish up here, I think the game that you're going to be there for on Saturday is interesting. Now, I'm an SEC fan, so I'm sort of interested in the game just because of that. But from a Georgia standpoint, it's also really interesting, too. And here's what I'll tell you. I've been pretty impressed with Tennessee thus far this season, despite the fact they haven't played a very rigorous schedule yet. I think on the list of top position groups in the SEC, I think you have to include the Tennessee wide receiving core. I think that's a very impressive group. But I will say in the Pitt game on the road, they did win, and they technically covered the spread. I don't know they quite flexed that day as much as I thought they might. And to me, that's what the game at home with game day on hand against Florida on Saturday is all about. It's a chance for Tennessee not just to beat Florida, something they haven't done with regularity, as you pointed out, in a long time, but to also maybe get the kind of convincing win that says that Tennessee is going to be a big part of the SEC story here this year. Now, there's a part of my brain that kind of gets unlocked with nobody thinks Florida's very good. Everybody thinks this is a day for Tennessee to kind of be coronated as kind of back to a certain degree. I'd be careful here if I was Tennessee. I'd be careful with the Gators kind of lying in wait. But the game story to me is about the Vols of just how good are they, how much can they demonstrate with a big TV piece of real estate at their disposal on Saturday.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There's a lot to be said for knowing how to handle the moment, and certainly Kirby Smart and Georgia football have learned how to handle the moment. I remember for a while there was some ridiculous game day stat, and people were freaking out because game day started coming to Sanford Stadium, and Kirby and his guys were like, don't worry about it, we got this. And they've just kicked everybody's butts now with game day present. I think they got the longest win streak on the road in the nation, Brandon, and I think Dogs have won 13 in a row at home. Tennessee, though, to your point, you talk about seeing ghosts. They haven't really beaten Florida with regularity, since the 1980s, pre-Spurrier. Now, Casey Clausen won a couple of games against the Gators. Georgia was his downfall, of course, but they have not beaten Florida since Butch Jones in Tennessee came from behind at halftime at Neyland Stadium in 2016, the same year as the crazy Hail Mary at Georgia. I guess Tennessee was living right that year. So there's a lot of people on pins and needles. There's a lot of people that do see ghosts when it comes to Florida. To your point about the Gators, it's all about Anthony Richardson. It's not fair. It's not right that a guy should have to put a team on his shoulders, but that's where Anthony Richardson is. They don't have good perimeter receiving threats. Florida's going to have to run the ball, control the clock, try to keep that explosive Tennessee offense off the field. Now, I will say this about the win over Pitt for Tennessee. that was a big win because they overcame adversity, because their defense had to get some stops. The story on this program right now is they're going to try to get you in a track meet and outscore you, and that's the only way. They're going to have to grow. If they're going to contend with a program like Georgia, and I want to be clear, I don't think they're within single digits of Georgia on the football field yet, but they're going to have to grow as a football program and a football team, and they're going to have to stay healthy because they do not have the sort of championship depth that programs like Georgia and Alabama have.
Mike, I think that's well said. I'm looking forward to your coverage there. Obviously, Georgia will play both these teams later on this season, so we'll read a lot from you, and I think we're going to speak to you on Saturday there too as a part of our video coverage on game day, so we'll look forward to doing that then, and obviously we'll get more thoughts on the Dogs from you next week here on DawgNation Daily there as well. We will talk to you soon.
All right, thanks, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So good stuff from Mike Griffith there as part of a Georgia Farm Bureau insider update. Georgia against Kent State, 2 Georgia rivals playing on Saturday. Interesting coverage from Mike Griffith on that. And I want to make this very clear. I don't think that Tennessee is good enough to challenge Georgia. I don't think that Tennessee would rank even as the second toughest game on the regular season for Georgia. I still think both the true road games that Georgia will play in November at Mississippi State, at Kentucky, are likely to be tougher the game against Tennessee. But do I think that the Georgia-Tennessee game could have a big game feel to it? I think it might could. And, if Tennessee wins this game, regardless of what happens third Saturday in October against Alabama, they go on the road to LSU at a certain point in year 2. I think there's a chance that Tennessee is good enough to make the home game in November feel like a big deal. A lot of folks are hoping that may be like the night game for Georgia here this year. That you kind of wonder, does Georgia ever get to play a home game at something other than noon or something other than the daytime? Well, maybe the Georgia-Tennessee game is where that might happen, where you do get a little bit of a nighttime vibe. You do get that really intense, big game feel. The problem with Georgia being as good as it is, it takes a lot for the other side to make the game feel big because Georgia's just a huge favorite in every game that it plays. At least for the foreseeable future, that's going to be the case. And I don't think that Tennessee is good enough to keep it close against Georgia, even though I do really, really respect their wide receivers. But could they play well enough in this game and some of the other games they're going to play to at least make the game feel big before kickoff? I think that might be the case. That's at least a possibility. Now, I also think you have to be really careful in these situations where everybody's kind of lining up and only talking about one side, and right now that's the way this game is. We'll do more of this in a moment. I think you have to be a little bit careful with that, but obviously there's a reason why Tennessee's earning more chatter than Florida is right now. Let's go cruise around the SEC now, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And boy, I was looking at some stuff for Perfect Day Coco K before the show began today. There's just so much that I love about that. One of the things I'm going to do prior to the DawgNation cruise is I'm actually taking my entire family on a cruise. And my kids don't know this yet, so if they hear this, they'll, I guess, find this out. But they're in school right now, so they won't hear it anyway. But I'm really excited about taking them to Perfect Day Coco K and having the experience there with all the stuff that goes on there. You have the Thrill Water Park, largest, tallest water slide in North America. So many cool things associated with that. It's just like a really fun kind of island oasis, and some of this is for adults sort of kick back and relax, but some of this is just for like families to play and have fun with. And I'm the kind of guy that sort of likes to do both. There is a part of me that does like to just sort of, camp out in a lounge chair and, read a magazine, have a couple cocktails, and just sort of let the sun bake me. I kind of like doing that, but I also like getting out and playing with my kids and stuff like that too. And on our Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, you really have the chance to do all of that. And when we're on our DawgNation cruise coming up in April, you'll have a chance to experience that too. Also watching the video on the screen, I just saw Playmaker Sports Bar. That's another thing that's kind of really fun about what we're going to be doing on Independence of the Seas coming up in April. A chance to enjoy Playmaker Sports Bar, all the great sort of sports action that takes place while we're there. It's going to be a great experience. A lot of you have already booked your cruise. I'm excited about that. If you want to find out more information, royaldogs.com, you can do that. You can also call our friend Jessica Slater. Jessica is a great travel agent. She's already booked personal travel for so many of our DawgNation folks, but also folks on the DawgNation cruise there as well. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147, 770-718-9147. Even if you just want to ask her some questions about this, including the question you probably should ask her, is this cruise going to really be as fun as BA says it's going to be? Let her tell you about that. get your questions answered. Then you can make the decision to join us for the DawgNation Cruise. April 24th, we're sailing out of Port Canaveral on Independence of the Seas. Big draft party, lots of special DawgNation events. It's not just the fun of a Royal Caribbean cruise. It's the fun of a Royal Caribbean cruise on board Independence of the Seas with DawgNation. Does not get any better than that. We are so excited about all of that. That is on the way. Something that some of y'all are less excited about, admittedly, is the 2023 schedule release for Georgia. Now, this is one of those things where we've kind of known who Georgia was playing for quite some time, but last night the SEC released all the schedule dates. Hey, I think this is really weird because, by the way, look at this. How about that? The Georgia schedule just pops up as a graphic on the screen, magically delivered by fairies, I guess. I wasn't expecting this production element today, but you see the schedule. UT Martin on September 2nd, Ball State on September 9th, South Carolina September 16th, UAB September 23rd. Georgia goes to Auburn on September 30th. So 4 straight home games to start it off. Weird that Kentucky's coming here October 7th. This is the earliest Georgia's ever played Kentucky, I got to think. That's typically been a November or sort of late October type date for Georgia. This has got to be the earliest Georgia's played Kentucky. I'm sure someone has reported that somewhere, but it's got to be early for that game. In Nashville on October 14th, obviously Jacksonville on October 28th, and then November looks like Missouri, Ole Miss at Tennessee. They're really trying to make this sort of Tennessee game at the end of the year into something where at some point in time, maybe it'll be for the SEC East. I think that's the hope, that game kind of becomes a little bit what the SEC West has, where you have a lot of division rivals playing near the end of the season and there's postseason implication when they play. They're trying to make that be a thing for Georgia, Tennessee. We'll see if that ever happens. But clearly the takeaway you have here is this is just not a very exciting home schedule for Georgia. And now, listen, maybe there's a possibility of the Ole Miss game on November 11th. They're ranked right now. They've been more good than not under Lane Kiffin. Maybe that game feels big when it's played. Maybe Kentucky on October 7th feels big when it's played. But right now, there are a lot of people who look, especially that September slate, with UT Martin and Ball State and UAB. Like, that's just a very different kind of schedule than we're used to seeing Georgia play. And obviously the Ball State edition is because the road game against Oklahoma got canceled. This is not a criticism of Georgia. I don't think that Georgia's necessarily done anything wrong. And if anything, they have taken great strides to try to play better games. But right now, we're in kind of a weird college football holding pattern. We're waiting for Oklahoma and Texas to join the SEC, and the schedule will be expanded and recreated at that point in time. But until that happens, we're just in kind of a weird lame duck period. And nationally, there's almost a little bit of that going on too, where while we're waiting for SEC expansion to occur, we're also waiting for college football playoff expansion to occur. This is a little bit of a problem for the entire sport for the next couple of years, and in particular Georgia, where you say, well, eventually we'll have better games being played, but for right now we have to sort of put up with this. That's a lot to ask for an entity the size of SEC football, Georgia football, things like that, that you don't like the idea of the next 24 months or however long it's going to be. You don't like the idea of that feeling like kind of like the end of an old era, the sort of playing out the string. That's almost like, the president, sort of the final days of his presidency. You don't like the idea of kind of a lame duck period here where you're waiting for new change and what some people believe is going to be change for the better to occur. But it seems like we're about to kind of go into that period with college football a little bit. And even for the most diehard Georgia fans, not a ton of folks excited about that 2023 home schedule. But maybe the Ole Miss game will look better in real life than it looks on paper right now. And maybe you'll have more to be excited about. But September next year, doesn't seem all that great here right now. Something else that doesn't seem all that great, in fact, seems decidedly terrible, that's the state of Auburn football. Thought it was interesting to see Bruce Feldman, who's a serious guy. Feldman's not, known to be a hot take artist necessarily. He was on the Paul Feinbaum show this week and was talking about the possibility of Deion Sanders becoming the next Auburn football coach. I think eventually Deion Sanders will and should get a shot at the Power 5 level. He has clearly cultivated a level of attention at Jackson State that would be very hard to do. Now, Deion is a little bit of an attention magnet because he's one of the great players of all time and kind of a cultural figure, really, from the 80s and 90s that brings a level of fame no matter where he goes, but still conjuring attention at the less than Power 5 level. Not easy to do, but at Jackson State, he's clearly done that. The Travis Hunter recruiting win, probably the best example of that, but there are others there too. So at a certain point, someone's going to want to give that shot to Deion Sanders. And so you're left to wonder, well, Deion, if you're going to coach in the Power 5 somewhere eventually, do you want to coach at Auburn? Because here's the thing we know about Auburn. Auburn is very much driven by its boosters, not the athletic director, not the president. It is driven by those that are writing the checks. Now, that wasn't necessarily the case when Brian Harsin was hired. All the more reason why those folks may feel more emboldened and more empowered moving forward, because they get a chance to say, hey, you didn't do what we told you to last time, and look how badly it worked out. Now you're going to listen to us forever. That may be the case. So if you're Deion Sanders, knowing you may have your choice of a couple of different jobs, would you be even interested in the Auburn job going forward? That's the thing that's going to be interesting about Auburn, is that sooner rather than later, they're going to be looking for a head coach. Brian Harsin, it's just simply a matter of when he's going to get fired. This was easy to predict before the year even began. But when you start thinking about who is that fit there moving forward, I think it's going to be the kind of person that does understand the nature of the Auburn challenge, that wants the Auburn challenge. And for someone like Deion, who, has a level of celebrity and fame that doesn't give him a lot of experience having to do what somebody else tells him to do. In a place like Auburn, you're going to do a lot of what somebody else tells you to do, because that's just sort of been the history of the program. I'm not quite so sure how good of a fit that would be. Also, speaking of change coming to college football, it now seems obvious, Mike Gundy has talked some about this, the Oklahoma State coach, that when Oklahoma officially moves the SEC, much the same way that Texas and Texas A&M stopped playing once the Aggies joined the SEC, that the Bedlam rivalry, a very good one for years between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, that's no longer going to be played. And this is that age-old battle that so many of us have with all of this, that, I think some of us try not to be against every form of change that takes place, because obviously that's not the right way to be. You can't view every single change that happens to college football as bad, but it does make us a little bit nervous sometimes when people who are so insistent that change occur show so little respect for the traditions that have made college football great. And listen, I don't live in Oklahoma. I've never been to Oklahoma, but I do understand the value of what Bedlam has been. It's a cool nickname for a rivalry, and over the years, Oklahoma versus Oklahoma State's really meant something. And the idea that now, because it's going to enrich Oklahoma to do so, and maybe, Oklahoma State, whatever, all of a sudden this series is not going to be played anymore. Ooh. That feels like a very aggressive level of disregard for understanding what has made college football so special. And I don't think that the sport's going to fall apart because Oklahoma's no longer playing Oklahoma State, but you have too many of those dominoes topple, and all of a sudden the thing that has made college football cool, the fact that it's different from the NFL, well, all of a sudden you wonder how much of that coolness will still be left if every tradition is just capable of being trampled upon at a moment's notice. So interesting to hear that what we kind of believe was probably true is indeed going to be true, and this rivalry series is not going to be played anymore. Interesting to consider all of that. Did you see what happened to the Arkansas game? I guess this was over the weekend. Was this the Missouri State game? A little bit of a fan altercation. I want to see if I can get the guy's name right, because this is probably important. So Doug Ramsey is his name. And I guess this was the Missouri State game on Saturday, that he got into an altercation and allegedly bit another fan in the nose. Now, what makes this weird is this guy was the chief operating officer for the company called Beyond Meat. It's a kind of a meatless meat, facsimile that's, I guess, for vegans and vegetarians and things like that. I don't really know much in life, but to me, the definition of irony is a guy who makes a product for vegans turning out to be a cannibal. Like that, that's a pretty odd level of irony there for me. And of all the weird things we've heard fans doing in a game, biting somebody else in the nose, probably the weirdest thing. That's kind of oddly intimate, I would say. I don't understand any part of this whatsoever. My experiences in Fayetteville, I have nothing but good things to say about the Arkansas fans. A lot of us have kind of become a little bit of a Razorback fan just because Sam Pittman and the love a lot of Georgia fans have for him. And this is not what I've come to expect from Arkansas fans. But I can tell you this. I don't want to be bitten on the nose by anybody. This is all a very odd story. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, later on this week, we're going to give you our thoughts on the big games of the week on our show called Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. But here on Wednesdays, we do kind of an early look ahead to that with what we call our MyBookie Best Bets, and we invite you to also make your own picks there at MyBookie each and every week too. So let's show you the games that matter most this weekend, the point spreads for those games. We talked a little bit of Georgia, Kent State off the top. Dogs a 46-point favorite over Kent State there on Saturday. So another expected easy game for the Dogs. And coming up here this week, we'll kind of weigh in on whether or not Georgia covers that big number at home. Weirdly, Georgia has been a little bit better at covering big numbers on the road, at least when Georgia's been favored by a big number on the road, than sometimes covering the 40-plus point number at home. It's just not easy to cover a gigantic spread. Georgia has not been great against point spreads this large, so keep that in mind as you consider the Golden Flashes there on Saturday. Tennessee hosting Florida with a 10.5-point spread, according to our friends at MyBookie. I'm not ready to make my pick on this just yet, but last week I told you that it felt very square to be on the side of Miami against Texas A&M because the entire world had given up on the Aggies. And sure enough, it was just as square as it turned out to be. And I was just as wrong as I feared I might be for aligning myself with Miami there in that spot. There's a little bit of an echo of that in this. I do expect Tennessee to win this game. And Tennessee may end up being my pick minus 10.5 because I do believe they're better than Florida is. And I do believe this is one of those games they get a chance to show that. Careful when it seems like the entire world is lined up on one side and almost all the chatter, it's a one-way street right now, almost all the chatter is about Tennessee in this game. Be a little bit careful with that. I feel the same way to a degree about Arkansas and Texas A&M because after Arkansas's undefeated start, after Texas A&M lost to Appalachian State, it didn't look great, even with the quarterback switch against Miami. Still a 2-point favorite against Arkansas and Jerry World on Saturday. That is something to keep in mind right there. That is a contrarian line that usually means a little something. So that'll be a fun pick to make. We make our official picks there on Friday. But just notice that point spread. Based on what we've seen with our own eyes, I think a lot of us on a neutral field would have assumed that Arkansas might be favored over Texas A&M. But my bookie, that wasn't the case, so keep that in mind. Missouri's at Auburn. Auburn's a 7-point favorite. These are two of the worst teams in the SEC. Auburn is truly wretched, but I don't know that even they are so bad they could mess this up at home against Missouri on Saturday. So that's a little bit of an early lean there. Hated Auburn last week against Penn State. That was the right side to be on. But even Auburn's not quite this bad. And then the best game outside the SEC this week, I believe, is Clemson going to Wake Forest. Wake Forest is 7.5-point home underdog here. And for Clemson, a chance to get its offense going, a chance to make a little bit of a statement for a team that wants to be a part of this playoff conversation. What you do in Winston-Salem on Saturday would probably go a long way towards determining just how real all of that is. And obviously, you hear me give my thoughts on the top games of the week here each week on DawgNation Daily. And many of you say, I can pick games better than you can. Well, I'm sure you probably could. And you have a chance to do just that. Put your money where your mouth is with our friends there at MyBookie, because with MyBookie, you can bet on anything, anytime, anywhere. Just find MyBookie online. Use the promo code DawgNation. And before you even place your first bet, before you even win your first bet, you're already going to be a winner with MyBookie because they're going to give you a 100% deposit bonus. That means you put in $250. MyBookie is going to give you another $250 right there in your account. You literally start with $500, which is twice what you put in there. You're a winner before you place your first bet. And then after that, you play, you win, you get paid. Spread bets, money line, totals, futures bets. You can get in on all of that. College, pro, everything else. All at MyBookie. But you've got to use the promo code DawgNation, DAWG, promo code DawgNation to take advantage of the big first deposit bonus. So anything, anytime, anywhere with our friends at MyBookie. Find them online, MyBookie. Use the promo code DawgNation. Then after that, you play, you win, you get paid. Also, quick invitation to all of you to send us in your submissions of you enjoying yourself with some finished long drink. Every Friday here on this show, we celebrate the weekend with what we call our Big Finish, presented by the Finished Long Drink, and we want you to be a part of it. You're enjoying the Finished Long Drink at your tailgate, at your watch party, as you're hanging out with friends at home on these college football Saturdays, or just making the time go by during the week to get ready for the weekend. Whatever you're doing, we want to showcase that as part of our Big Finish, presented by the Finished Long Drink. And if you're saying, well, BA, I've heard you talk about the long drink, but I've never actually tried some myself, great time for you to do that right now. Go to thelongdrink.com, whether it be the long drink cranberry, the long drink strong, which is 8.5% alcohol by volume, long drink zero, that's no carbs, no sugar, the traditional long drink in the blue can with the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. That's actually probably my favorite of all the different long drink varieties. Whichever one you think you might like, I think you probably will. You can also get the 8-can variety pack and try 2 different cans of each of the 4 different long drink varieties. Just go to thelongdrink.com and find out bar near you, beverage store near you, a lot of golf courses around the Atlanta area. It's very big there. I've had it on a number of golf courses throughout the spring and summer, heading into the fall. So a lot of great places to get it and a great time for you to enjoy it. And we'll celebrate you and your pictures of yourself with the Finish Long Drink as a part of our Big Finish presented by the Finish Long Drink coming up on Friday. And as we wrap up here today, I got a funny tweet the other day. I wanted to show you this as our golden shoe today. So you've got a lot going well for your program when the program puts out a tweet highlighting the NFL players playing on Monday Night Football, but they don't have enough room in the graphic to get everybody who's playing. I got this. I want to show this to you. I think this is really good. So what Georgia did was the other night, Georgia put out a graphic of players on Monday Night Football, and you see Isaiah McKenzie, and you see James Cook, and you see Lewis Seen, you see Nakobe Dean, and the caption from Georgia football says, "A Monday night full of dogs." And Tim wrote to me on Twitter to say, Jordan Davis didn't even fit on this graphic, which is really funny to think about, that he's another dog that was playing on Monday Night Football this past week. And obviously, as the Tim suggests, Jordan being as big as he is, maybe there just wasn't room for him there on that. But it also kind of shows you the depth of the Georgia program right now. So we'll make Tim a golden shoe winner for today. Also remind you, lousy, stinking Gators, long time since they've won a national championship. How about more than 5,000 days since they've won the national championship? We count that down each and every day here. In fact, it's been 5,004 days since the lousy, stinking Gators won a national championship. And our Gator Hater Countdown back in Jacksonville, beating up on Florida. Again, we'll do that 38 days from right now. 38 days from right now. Back in Jacksonville, beating up on Florida again. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for R.S. Andrews cool down. 2 fingers in the air. Go for 2 in 22. That is what it's all about. And that is what we're doing. We're not saying peace. We're saying come get your peace, because that's what we believe that Georgia is all about here this year. All right, I'll get your comments. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, everywhere else. Let me do DawgNation.com for a second. On DawgNation.com. Let's see what else is going on. Matt Rukavina's still in Hawaii. Wow, that's amazing. How about that for him? Amazing to see. Always traveling somewhere. Dogs on Top says Hugh Freeze to Auburn. I think a guy like Hugh Freeze would have a better understanding of what's required at Auburn than a guy like Dion, who's just not that used to having to placate a bunch of boosters. That's just not what his life has been about prior to this. But for someone like Hugh Freeze, especially for Freeze, who I think would have a huge level of gratitude just for kind of being back in the mix again after at one point in time he was as much a outcast as one can be in the SEC. If he was ever granted access back into the league again, I think he'd be a very good soldier for whoever hired him, and whatever booster was instrumental in kind of greasing the wheels for that to occur. I'm guessing that Freeze would feel pretty indebted to all of that. So I think that a guy like Freeze might just be a better example of someone who could navigate that landscape, or maybe even be more willing to navigate that landscape. And oh boy, the jokes, the comedic fodder for Freeze back in the SEC at a place like Auburn, boy, that'd be something. Bob Zamblin says, great to see Mike G on the road. Good to see Bob in the comment section today, too, by the way. He says, are you going to go on the road, BA? So I'll be in Athens on Saturday. We were in Columbia this past weekend. As far as the show on the road, we like to be in studio as much as we can. We like the friendly confines as much as we can possibly get them. But it was nice to have Mike join us from Knoxville here today. Cam Hasty says, Hugh Freeze just doesn't scare me as a coach anymore. Yeah, I wouldn't be so quick to say that. I mean, I'm not telling you he's going to win the West at Auburn if he were to go there. That's not what I'm saying. But I still think that Hugh Freeze is a pretty good coach. I do. Now, he's been at, Liberty. Maybe you don't know how much you can judge on that. But this is a guy that when he was coach at Ole Miss beat Saban twice. That's not a small feat. So do I think that Freeze, despite the baggage in his personal life, is a pretty superior coaching mind? I don't have any hesitation in saying that. I definitely do. Definitely do. Johnny Surf Dog says, my hot take is the Dogs on field success going to have some huge flips. He says maybe even Justice Haynes. I don't know about Justice. I don't know that I would say that. But could Georgia get back involved with some players because of what they're doing right now? I'd say that's probably a possibility. Joe Gagliardi would like to see some of Gunnar Stockton. I doubt that's going to happen on Saturday. I do. I doubt that's going to happen. But I've heard a lot of good things about Gunnar, like really favorable things about Gunnar. And like I just don't get as into the, oh my gosh, how many backups are going to play on Saturday. I'm not saying that Joe does this. I'm saying like of the things that I spend time worrying about, what happens in garbage time of Georgia games is not something I'm just all that worried about. It's just not that interesting to me. And I'm not criticizing Joe's comment because Joe's a great commenter, but like how much is Carson Beck going to play? He's going to play about as much as a typical backup plays. And how much is the third string quarterback going to play? He's going to play about as much as a typical third string quarterback is going to play. And that's just sort of all there is to it. There's a fairly established template for how much guys play, and I don't know that Georgia's going to deviate all that much from that, nor do I think they probably should. And like I don't know that Carson playing in sort of garbage time necessarily makes him all that much better as a potential 2023 quarterback. In other words, so Carson's playing a lot right now, he's playing more than some backups across the country are, but he's playing, relatively speaking, a lot right now. But does that mean that I am absolutely sure that he's going to be the starting quarterback next year? I would say that he certainly maybe has a slight edge there because he's been the backup, but a guy that I don't expect to play at all that Joe mentioned, Gunnar Stockton, could Stockton beat out Beck over the course of this offseason, and could he actually at some point in time become the Georgia quarterback next year? I totally view that as a possibility, and my expectation is that Gunnar won't play at all this year. But could he be the starting quarterback for Georgia next season? I believe that's absolutely a possibility. I do. So I think the race to be Georgia's 2023 starting quarterback doesn't actually begin until like February of 2023. And obviously the experience that Carson's getting now is beneficial, and it helps him, and it probably gives him an edge in the competition. But it will not be the death knell of the competition. Like the competition won't end because Beck is right now the backup. And you say, well, one of these guys, they don't play, they may transfer. One of these guys probably will transfer. That's as certain as almost anything is. Now, I think they'll probably give themselves a shot to win this job prior to that. But in all likelihood, between the three quarterbacks that's not named Stetson Bennett in this program, at least one of those guys almost certainly will transfer eventually, because half the quarterbacks that are starting in college football right now are former transfers. That's just what happens. Quarterbacks do transfer. So, if you took the four quarterbacks in the Georgia roster and played them a quarter on Saturday, still the odds are one of them will eventually transfer. I don't think that you can do much to change that. I am just only I have a very limited interest in what happens with quarterback, third and fourth quarter of this game. I mean, obviously I want Georgia to always play well, but that's not as hot a topic for me as it kind of seemingly is for others. Although I don't mind the questions, I don't mind talking about it, but Georgia is just not going to wildly deviate from what teams normally do when it comes to its quarterback situation. Hunker down 93 going in on tag. Let's see what else. Brandon Griffin pointing out they're all going to have to compete for the starting job in the spring. Yeah, I mean, that's the case. Obviously Beck looks like a quarterback that's been on campus for 3 years. Like, he's using his experience to his advantage. But right now, he's the 3-year guy, and Beck is and Stockton's the 0-year guy, and that's a huge advantage. But when you're the 4-year guy and the other guy's a 2nd-year guy, that's not quite as much of an advantage anymore. And in the case of Vandergriff, that's very much true there too. We're like, okay, so next year he's in year 3 in the program. All of a sudden now he's been here for a while, and maybe he feels as seasoned then as someone like Carson Beck does now. Now, all of this is also possible that maybe Carson Beck is the next starting quarterback at Georgia. Clearly, he's the backup right now for a reason. He's deemed to be ahead of the others, and that could continue into next year there as well. But, I think that Beck has been good. I think he's been fine. I don't think that he's been any more remarkable than most backup quarterbacks on most really good teams. And I would say that, given the right set of circumstances, I think that Vandegrift and Stockton will still be heard from in a big way. And one way or another, the chips will just sort of, fall wherever they may on that. I do. Let me go to YouTube. And check it out over here. On YouTube, John Main wonders if the fan who got bit by the players in the nose get an NIL deal from Tyson. That's funny. Tyson's Meats is obviously a very famous Arkansas booster type company, and obviously they would probably have a little bit of a beef, no pun intended, with the Beyond Meat folks. That'd actually be a pretty good one right there. I like that. Jonathan Aaron says, I'm a little upset that not a single soul on ESPN's asked Dan Mullen when recruiting season begins. It's very funny, Jonathan. Very funny. Frederick Meredith says that Gunnar Stockton's already confirmed he's going to graduate from Georgia. Yeah, I mean, a guy like this, you would sort of expect him to stay around. And here's the one thing I think a lot of folks can understand is, or I think that you may have a growing number of people who begin to understand this, is that transferring is not a guarantee for happiness and success. That a lot of guys who have transferred have actually found themselves in a worse position than the place they transferred out of. Like Zach Calzada was the starter last year for Texas A&M. He's the third string quarterback at Auburn, and Auburn is terrible. That moving creates an unpredictable scenario, and you can't control the outcome. You can pick your destination, but you can't write your story once you get there. You can't control the outcome for all of that. And in the case of Calzada, he's not playing at all. I didn't watch a ton of Tech and Ole Miss on Saturday, but Jackson Dart, he's not really the guy for Ole Miss right now either, right? The other kid, the Altmaier kid, Luke Altmaier, that's going to be their quarterback. Jackson Dart was like the golden child transfer from USC. Oh, everybody's kind of falling all over themselves. And he's very likely not going to be the guy for Ole Miss. I'd say to a certain extent JT Daniels there as well. JT Daniels spent the entire offseason trying to figure out where he should transfer and seemingly finished with the top three of Oregon State and Missouri and West Virginia. Chose to go to West Virginia, and West Virginia is terrible. Daniels, when I've watched him, he's looked okay, but West Virginia is terrible. They're awful. They may be the worst team in the Big 12. That for a while, it was seen as, I'm going to transfer, I'm going to pick my destination, I'm going to write my story. But a lot of the quarterbacks who have transferred are finding out that actually sometimes the transfer situation isn't quite so great that once you make it. And so if I'm a quarterback, like say Gunnar Stockton, buried on the depth chart at Georgia, fourth string right now, spending my time here, learning the offense, getting comfortable on the campus, getting comfortable in the program, and leveraging this time spent towards a better future, that may be the right way to go. That's what Carson Beck so far has chosen to do, and it seems to be working out pretty well for him right now. Let's see what else. Frederick Meredith says, in February, Beck, Brock Vandegrift, and Stockton are going to start out even, and may the best man win. So, Frederick, the one thing I'll slightly disagree with is I don't think it's necessarily even. I don't. I think that Beck, because he's number 2 right now, has to have a little bit of an edge going into next year. For instance, first day of spring practice, somebody has to get the first rep. So, you know what I'm saying? Like there is a first rep to be had by somebody, and Beck almost certainly will get that. So from that standpoint, Beck probably starts off a little bit of the head of the others, but the overall point that you're making, which I do think you and I would be in agreement on, is that whatever perceived edge exists because he's been number 2 quarterback this year is not an insurmountable lead. It's not the kind of thing where, obviously I would say that Brock Vandegrift would have a chance to overtake him, but I would say that Gunnar Stockton, I absolutely view it as a possibility that Gunnar Stockton is Georgia's starting quarterback next season. Based on the things I've heard about Stockton, based on just overall perception of him as a player I had before even hearing some of those things, it is absolutely possible that Gunnar Stockton is the starting quarterback for Georgia and a very capable, successful starting quarterback, despite the fact that, barring something very weird happening, I don't think that Stockton will play this year at all. I don't think he'll take a snap in a game. But is there a chance that he is Georgia's starting quarterback next season? Absolutely, there is a chance. Because in college football, we have a pretty big history of like redshirt freshman quarterbacks being pretty good anyway. We've seen a lot of this before. So Stockton would not be out of the realm of possibility of what we've seen in the past. Chase White says, I don't know. Beck did great on Saturday. I'm not saying that Beck isn't a viable candidate to also be starter. I'm not saying that. But it is not, in my mind, a done deal, and it won't be a done deal. And if Carson were to play the entire second half there on Saturday, it still wouldn't change that feeling for me that Beck has clearly earned the right to be the number 2 quarterback, and the battle to be the number 1 quarterback in 2023 will still be an intense one. Wyatt Fielded says he looked comfortable and looks good in the offense. Yeah, he does. He does. No question about that. Wyatt Fielded says, do you think this defense is better than last year's defense? I think this defense is really elite. I certainly think they are on their way to being in a very similar conversation. Now, last year's Georgia defense was historic, all-time great. As I've said a lot, the only thing this defense needs to be this year is just the best defense in the country for this year, right? It's like you don't have to match the historic nature of the 2021 defense. You just have to be better than the teams you play in 2022. And I believe that Georgia is certainly more than capable of doing that. I think in terms of the impactful pass rush, relentless tackle for loss team we saw a year ago, I don't know yet we're seeing those chops on this Georgia defense just yet. We maybe, by the time it really matters, by the time you get to very serious football time, the winter, as Kirby Smart talked about, we may get there then, but I don't know that we're quite there yet. But it is certainly a very impressive unit, and through 3 games, I think they're better than some folks gave them credit for during the preseason. Lee Burrow says, with you 100% on the irony of the Arkansas fan story. That was hilarious. Thanks for that story. As someone that eats meat but appreciates the discipline it takes to be a vegan. Braves' first pitch in 60. That is true, by the way. Braves day game today, going for the sweep against the Nationals, and it would come at a good time here. Good stuff. Appreciate that. Let's go to Facebook here for a moment. On Facebook. Pete Williams says that Stockton's one of the toughest quarterbacks I've ever seen. Dude runs like a running back and throws like Tom Brady. Yeah, I mean, I saw him last year in a very tough spot on the road in Thomasville. Very good Thomasville team. And their pass pressure on him that day was relentless. And he got beaten up. I'm talking about he got bloodied. And he just stood there and took it the whole time. And he was. I mean, he was – Pete, you're saying it absolutely right. He was as physically tough as you've seen. And he showed that kind of running style the entire time that he played. This is a strong guy. This is a stout, strong guy. And obviously he has all kinds of passing type records in Georgia high school football, things like that. Very prolific stat guy there too. And in addition to that, there are no shortage of people who have said really complimentary things about him thus far during his first year on campus. Now, if this gets construed as me saying he's my pick to be the guy, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not saying that at all. I don't favor anybody yet for the quarterback race. But I'm telling you that even if he's viewed to be number 4 right now, and if he's viewed to be a guy that's not playing, I'm saying don't count him out even. So if I'm saying don't count out Stockton, that means you definitely don't count out Brock Vandegrift. And obviously you show respect to a guy like Carson Beck, who has looked very capable and comfortable in the number 2 role here this year. So part of me kind of vouching and talking up Stockton right now is just a reflection of the fact that I do believe he's still a part of the conversation, even if he doesn't play this year, and I don't suspect he will. Let's see what else. Steve Rogers says, I have the best collection of old school T-shirts. I appreciate that, Steve. I do enjoy the old school T-shirts. I appreciate that, Steve. That's awesome to hear. Lucy Bowers-Boykin, great to see you as always. So this is interesting. Is this Ryan Walker that says this? So your godfather was Clarence Kay, the former Denver Broncos tight end. That's really cool. So, Georgia's had a history of having guys in the Super Bowl for a long time. And when I was a kid, the Georgia player that was always playing in the Super Bowl for a long time was Clarence Kay from the Denver Broncos. And Ryan says that's his godfather. That's pretty cool. Also, he says that Deion Sanders is a Hall of Fame college player and NFL player for a reason. Yeah. I mean, I think he's definitely in a strong conversation for greatest cornerback of all time. I do. I do, for sure. Nick Roundtree says, here's the real question. Will the part of our 1-2 punch at running back next season include Cash Jones? Dude keeps stiff-arming defenders with authority. He may be known as the Hobbit Howitzer, just mowing dudes down. He did come in last week like a house of fire, right? He came in with authority. And I got to say that's probably a pretty fun situation to find yourself in. I mean, you're fresh as a daisy. The guys you're playing with in some cases are kind of fatigued. They are sure as heck ready for the game to be over with because they're getting drilled. And you just come out there stiff-arming and making guys miss. I'd say that's probably a pretty fun position to be in. Let's see what else. Barry Watkins says, will Monken interview for the Nebraska job? With all due respect to Todd Monken, I believe Nebraska is probably shooting a little higher than that, I would think. This is a Nebraska program with gobs of money. And I'm not in any way disparaging Monken because Georgia's scoring like 2 touchdowns per game more right now than it did the last season before he got here. Like, this is a remarkable offensive transition. I don't know that you can be, better over the course of a 2 and can y'all believe this? I'm going to deviate just for a second. Do you know after Saturday, the regular season is 1/3 of the way done? Like, is that crazy? Like, we spend months waiting for the season to get here. And after Saturday, now Georgia's, going to play, a gazillion games after December. But if you only think about the regular season here for a moment, because that's all that's really guaranteed, after Saturday, the regular season is 1/3 of the way done. So that's bizarre to me. But the point is that through 2 1/3 seasons of play, I don't know that you could be better offensively than what Monken has been here at Georgia. He has been that good. Transformation is not easy to oversee, and he has overseen a marvelous transformation of the Georgia offense. But Nebraska's got big bucks. Like, this is one of the things I think we just sort of forget sometimes because we kind of see, very little high school talent in Nebraska. They're kind of a boring team, have nondescript uniforms even. We live a good ways away from Lincoln down here, and I don't think we fully process just how large a lot of these Big Ten fan bases are, including Nebraska, one of the biggest of them all. Huge level of fan support, and that creates a huge level of financial support too. You don't have like the really big boosters. I don't know that corn futures are quite like oil futures are necessarily, but the sheer number of folks willing to support the program creates a lot of money around the program. So I think that Nebraska has a chance to probably make a pretty good hire if it wants to. And they may want someone with a little bit more of a proven record than Todd Monken in terms of its next head coach. So I think that Monken would probably do well not to be interested in the Arizona State job. And I think in the case of Nebraska, they would probably shoot a little higher than someone like Monken, who as a head coach is kind of an unproven commodity right now. That's my most honest answer for that. Because remember, this is not just a caricature. I mean, Monken is not as well known for his recruiting work as he is for his on-field work. And for a head coach, that is still a big part of the operation. And so I would say that Nebraska probably understands that because clearly the lack of good players is kind of what's hurting them right now. Matt Rukavina mentioning Tom Herman for the Nebraska job. I could see something like that. I think they might be well served by bringing someone who understands the Big Ten. Herman was an offensive coordinator at Ohio State, so he has a little bit of an understanding of the league. He didn't do awful at Texas necessarily. You could hire him tomorrow. I'm not saying that's who's going to get the job, but I could see someone like Herman getting that job. And, I think most of us would rather have Todd Monken as the Georgia offensive coordinator than having Tom Herman as the offensive coordinator. I think most of us would probably say that. But as the head coach, Herman's probably a little more proven. Pete Williams says was impressed with how Beck's accuracy has come along. Yeah, he looked pretty good to me in that respect. He did. Looked pretty good to me. All right, let's bounce through the comment section. We're going to get off the air. Johnny Surf Dog says, back up the Brinks truck and pay Monken and King's ransom. I mean, I think that's basically what Georgia's done. I mean, Monken's making a lot of money right now. And, could you pay him even more money to keep him here in the future? You probably could, I guess. But there does come a point in time in which if you are wired to want to be a head coach or if you're wired to want to be an NFL play caller, then that's what you would probably do, money aside. Because once you've got more money you can spend in a lifetime, then at that point in time it simply becomes being, about making the kinds of career choices you want to make. And Monken may doesn't quite have, life-altering money yet, but he's, certainly after as long as he's been coaching, he's probably on his way to being able to make whatever professional choice he wants to be able to make. But there are only 32 NFL offensive coordinator jobs, and there's only a small number of head coaching jobs that feel like, really good, true destinations. But Georgia has spent big on a guy like Monken already. So that's one of the things that keeps you in the Monken business here is that he's already kind of that $2 million club, that's not small money for an offensive coordinator. Not small money. Hunger Down 93 said they were, along with Cat Story, talking about another Marlowe's event. I hope we're able to do something like that again very soon. I don't quite know what the future holds for us on that, but it would be fun to be able to do that again very soon. It would. It would. Brian Jones says, almost seems unreal that we could go 12-0 in the regular season back-to-back years. That would be very fun to consider. Very fun to consider. Johnny Surf Dog says, we should all be sending flowers and gifts and love letters to Monken's house. Yeah, there's no doubt that he is a tremendous offensive coordinator. And the thing that I noticed right away about Monken is, in 2020, Georgia was in the midst of a not-so-great season. Lost a couple of regular season games. It was pandemic. Things were weird. But I noticed at the time that Georgia's offense wasn't really getting much criticism at all in terms of the offensive system. And offensive coordinators are always the most commonly criticized figure involved in almost any football team, even more so than the head coach. A lot of times, offensive coordinator just takes the brunt of criticism about anything, fairly or not. It's just a focal point for criticism. And in a year in which things weren't great for Georgia, they didn't even win the East that year. What I noticed was Monken from fans wasn't getting any criticism at all. And that was a real strong indication to me that, hey, you know what? There seems to be an understanding here that Georgia has a good game plan in place. Now, they were playing a tougher schedule, only SEC opponents during the regular season. Top 10 team in a bowl game. But the overall functioning of the offense is going pretty well. And then in 2021, obviously went to the next level after that. And here in 2022, it's taking another level after that there as well. Really good, capable teams don't often keep an offensive coordinator in place for 3 years. But that's what Georgia's got a chance to do with Monken here, and the rewards are clearly being reaped at the moment. So gratitude on the part of fans, I do think that exists. I do. Herb Hamilton also mentioning the way in which Georgia's able to take care of its assistants being a big part of the program's strength. There's no doubt that's true. It's one of the reasons why we made on this show, kind of coming from a fan perspective, we made a bigger deal about Todd Hartley getting a raise to like $600,000 than we did about Kirby Smart getting a raise to like $11 million. Like, that's huge money for the head coach, but every team for the most part pays their head coach a lot of money. But there are far fewer programs that are really capable of opening the pocketbook and the wallet for the assistant coaches and those position coaches, making them well paid, or making coordinators not feel like they have to go somewhere else to get the big contract or even leverage another offer for the big contract. Georgia takes care of its staff, and that's the kind of thing that you do notice over the course of the long haul. Now, you're still going to have changeover of probably about 40 or 50% every 1 or 2 years and maybe 100% every 4 or 5 years, you're still going to have a large level of turnover, but even a little bit of continuity goes a long way, and Georgia's willingness to pay its assistants keeps that little bit of continuity in place that provides infrastructure for the whole thing. I had a high school coach tell me last week that for the first time in his coaching career, he had to replace his offensive, defensive, and special teams coordinator in the same offseason. And he said that the fact that the program made 3 new hires like that and was able to maintain the same level of success, not just winning games, but kind of the day-to-day operation. He said the fact that we didn't really skip a beat replacing 3 important voices like that, he said that was probably the most proud thing for him since he's been head coach of this particular program. And I thought that really meant a lot to me, that coaches who are seeing the day-to-day inner workings of a program understand how important those extra voices are. Because there's only so much any one individual can do. In business, you call this leverage. You bring in other people to kind of create kind of a network effect, kind of a scale effect. And you bring in other people to echo the same message that you want to deliver. And the farther you get away from that kind of point leader, the more challenging some of that kind of becomes. And this high school coach said, hey, new voices, but the same programs in place. He felt confident that the infrastructure, the bones were solid. And for a place like Georgia, when you can keep even some of your guys here for just a little bit longer, that enables you to have the same level of success there too. All right, final comments, then we've got to go. Let's see what else. All right, so let's get ready to do 1 or 2 more comments, and we got to hop off. Thomas Tyson says Kirby would never leave another college program. Totally agree with that. Jay Shipe says he could see him in the WWF, which is kind of funny to think about. Jonathan Aaron says, being a married man like you are, if mom ain't happy, nobody's happy. If Monken's wife is happy and likes it here, he will stay. I think you're right about that, Jonathan, and I have heard that she is. I've heard that she actually really likes it in Athens. Now, who doesn't, of course, but I have heard that she really does enjoy it in Athens. I have heard that. All right, we got to go for now. Thanks for being here. Enjoy your day. Thanks for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all check out the AJC online, ajc.com. Coverage of the Braves going for a sweep against the Nationals today. And Falcons trying to pick up the pieces after an 0-2 start. Everything else going on across the city. Obviously getting ready for elections, stuff like that. You can read that online there as well. So a lot is going on. Make sure you check that out. And our friends at R.S. Andrews, too, online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today. And we will see you tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody.